right, good evening, folks. Thanks for being on. We want to give everybody a chance to log in tonight. So thank you for joining us, and especially for being here right at 6:30. We'll get started momentarily. Okay, well, good evening. Welcome to tonight's talkback conversation with Wilmington on Fire film director and producer Chris Everett. My name is Tomas Lopez. My pronouns are he, him, and his, and I'm Democracy North Carolina's executive director. As I think many of you who are with us tonight know, we are a nonpartisan nonprofit that works to build the transformed political process that works for all. We do that through grassroots organizing, policy advocacy and research, communications, and more. And what we're trying to do is strengthen our state's democratic structures, do our part to build meaningful community level power, and increase the belief not just in democracy, but in our collective ability to transform it. Now, before we get started tonight, I want to take just a moment to go over some quick housekeeping. The first is, and I've seen this question in the chat, if you were not able to press play today and watch Wilmington on Fire, that is okay. The screener code is available for all of our supporters from now until March 8th. And I think we're going to drop it in the chat box below, but you can also find it in the email that you received when you registered for this event. Second, if you're new to our virtual event setting, just know that over the course of the next hour, you are going to be in view only and listen only mode. So you're going to be on mute and you're going to have your video off. So you don't have to worry if you need to get up, grab something. You're fine. We're not going to see it. You're totally okay. I think many of you have already discovered my next point, which is the Q&A box. That is down at the bottom of your Zoom window. We're going to be doing our best to try to answer questions you have both during the discussion and during the Q&A period we are having at the end of it. We're also recording this and are going to send it to you after this event, whether you are able to stay for the whole hour or not, and you should feel free to forward this to anyone who couldn't make it tonight. We believe that the conversation that we're having tonight is important for the year to come and even beyond. And so we're also streaming this meeting live on our Facebook page. So hi to Facebook folks watching and discussing the film on Twitter. And so you can share that or retweet to your networks now or later. That's facebook.com/Democracy North Carolina and twitter.com/DemocracyNC. By being here tonight in the great company of Wilmington on Fire director and producer Chris Everett, our hope is to better understand the horrific history of the Wilmington Massacre of 1898. We're going to gain some insight into how the film was created, discuss how we can work together toward building accountability and a system of justice and reparations for the families and victims who lost their lives that day. Quick synopsis of the film. I believe many of you have seen it. But in 1898, Wilmington was North Carolina's largest city, and a majority Black population, a thriving Black middle class, and a biracial Republican populist fusion government. And on November 10th of that year, an armed mob of Democratic Party-backed white supremacists opened fire on Black neighborhoods, slaughtered hundreds, and drove thousands out of the city for good. In a 5-year passion project that consumed his resources, director Christopher Everett amassed rare photographs, original research, and testimonies from historians and descendants of the victims to uncover a shocking event that marked a turning point in the politics of the post-Reconstruction South. And yet, as we know all too well in 2021, insurrection is not an abstract historical idea. Our history in North Carolina has bracing lessons for the whole country right now. Tonight, we're going to be touching on the relationship between history and violence, between white supremacy in the past and in the present, and what exactly we can be doing. I want to introduce our guest this evening, Desiree Gatewood, my colleague here at Democracy North Carolina, our voter outreach coordinator, and Christopher Everett, again, director and producer of Wilmington on Fire. I want to start by sharing a little bit about Christopher. He's a Durham-based producer and director of the award-winning documentary film Wilmington on Fire. He's the founder and president of Speller Street Films, North Carolina's premier film production and distribution company, and currently works with Full Frame Documentary Film Festival as its communications manager. His notable awards include Best Local Independent Film from Encore Magazine in 2016, and Best Director First Feature Commentary from the Pan-African Film Festival in 2017. Christopher is currently filming his next 2 documentaries, Wilmington on Fire, Chapter 2, which I think we'll hear some about tonight, and Grandmaster, which looks at the legacy of martial arts pioneer Vic Moore. My colleague Desmond Gatewood has spent the majority of her adult life organizing and advocating for equitable policies and practices. As a Durham native and graduate of North Carolina Central University, Desmond has Southern roots and former passion for engaging both rural and urban communities in political advocacy. As voter outreach coordinator, she seeks to merge her experience as a political organizer and her knowledge of change theory to further our organization's mission to help North Carolina achieve meaningful pro-democracy reform. We hope you'll stick with us for tonight's conversation. There are, as of right now, over 400 of you here tonight, and we are so grateful that you would join us. We want to recognize that this discussion references traumatic portions of our state's and our country's complex history. And so do want to encourage you to opt in or out of this discussion at a level that fits your needs. Again, very grateful for all of you being here. Grateful to my colleague Desmond, for Chris Everett for joining us this evening, and hope we all leave more informed and educated about the events of 1898. I now turn it over to my friend and colleague Desmond Gatewood to officially welcome our special guest, Wilmington on Fire director and producer, Chris Everett.
Thank you so much for that, Tomas. Hello, everybody around North Carolina and throughout the country. We are so fortunate to have you here tonight. This is a great way for us to phase out of Black History Month and really look at some of these lessons that we can actually digest from right here in 2021. We don't even have to go back, but for so far, we're going to be making some parallels between the 1898 Wilmington Massacre to the January 6, 2021 insurrection right here. And what we're going to start by doing, of course, is talking to Chris Everett. Chris, if you could just give us a few words, anything you want to speak on so far, and then we can get right into the discussion.
Oh, no, I just want to thank you guys, and Democracy NC for putting on this program. A lot of people have been talking about it, been hitting me up, and look forward to this discussion. So thank you again for having me on your platform.
Awesome. And we are going to ask if we can mute the chat for a little while, but we are going to keep the Q&A open. So as you all have questions, please feel free to send them our way. All right. So Chris, I'm going to be transparent. It was very difficult trying to figure out how to frame this discussion. Because as you know, there are a lot of layers here. As we're exiting the Trump administration, and we can reflect on these last 4 years. It's definitely a lot to hold in context. So just to get started, I think white supremacy is the best container to put all of this in.
Right.
We can't figure out any other way. And when we're thinking about white supremacy and extremism from 1898 to 2021, what I've done is I've drawn some really, to me, clear parallels. And so here are some of the characteristics that I saw. Fueled by fear, an internal government relationship with actors on the ground, acts of intimidation, and they're also being America's empowerment of white supremacy. But let's start from the beginning, fueled by fear, because if people are acting off of emotion, and we're gonna call rage and emotion, white rage, there has to be some sort of catalyst.
Right.
So in order for there to be fear, you know anything about psychology, you have fight or flight response, but there has to be something to stimulate that. There has to be some sort of perceived threat. So can you talk about how white rage was actually fueled by fear from the very beginning here in 1898?
Yeah, well, I guess, you have to take it back a little bit further than that. You really have to look at, after the Civil War and when African Americans were freed from bondage, from slavery, there was a direct attempt by society as a whole to make people afraid of African Americans and also African American progress. Even, like I said, right after the end of slavery, this was getting put out there. So, it didn't start with 1898. It started right after the end of slavery. Once we started to get involved in politics, during this whole Reconstruction movement, where African Americans started to build schools, get involved in politics, start businesses, and really starting to try to be a part of this American society. You started to see those fear tactics and campaigns all throughout mass media at the time, the newspapers and things like that. So those things were already being in place to put that fear in the minds of white Americans, white citizens, that if African Americans rise up to power, they're going to end up taking over. They would always use the whole sexual things of Black men, or will get so powerful that they'll end up taking all your white women, your white daughters, all of those erroneous type of things that they would throw out there. So they were doing that. You saw a lot of that stuff heighten up towards after the end of slavery, and then especially leading up to the 1898 massacre as well, where it just elevated even more.
Yeah, and again, I was having some difficulties trying to distinguish which aspects of what go into this, because I mean, it was really almost a conspiracy that was happening at almost every single level of society, where you have citizens, you have the media, you have the government officials. I mean, so it's really difficult to try to isolate these pieces, because what I was trying to do, I was like, well, let's talk about how the media fueled this, and let's talk about how the politicians fueled this. But that said, so can you talk about this relationship that people that were actually in elected office, like Rebecca Latimer, the white union, can you talk about the relationship that people in office actually had with the militias on the ground that were perpetuating this violence?
Yeah, well, again, before 1898, you got to go back. A lot of this stuff ties back to what the United States didn't do after the Civil War, meaning that the Confederacy committing treason, when they succeeded, and then with this Civil War, a lot of them were able to still get back into society and participate in politics, keep all their land, resources, and everything. So that was one mistake by the United States right there. They should never allow these folks to even be able to participate in politics, but they did. And then that ended up, being the downfall of our progression as well, because doing that allowed them to still do a lot of these white supremacy tactics throughout the South. And, we touched on that in the film, where you had a lot of Black elected officials that were being assassinated, killed, and everything throughout the South. And then in North Carolina, in the political sense of things, you had a lot of these folks who got into politics after the Civil War. And, a lot of them fought for the Confederacy as well. And so they pretty much, used their influence and power to do certain things and really to hype up and rally the common and average white person to do like the dirty work, to do the mass murdering, the shooting, the looting and stuff like that. So it was different factions to this thing. You had the political side of things, people that were trying to push legislation. You also had the folks in politics who were great orators at the time, people like Alfred Moore Waddell, Charles Brantley Aycock, who later became the governor, that would do white supremacy speeches throughout North Carolina. To really galvanize and, getting that white base together to really, set the climate for when they would actually do the massacre. There really wouldn't be a lot of pushback. So you had it all the way from the politics to the business community, the legal side of things, because a lot of these folks were lawyers as well, all the way down to the local average white person involved in this.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you mentioned ACOC, and this entire conversation around the insurrection has been fascinating to me, because I actually used to work on the Hill, and I remember giving Capitol tours. I used to work for one of our congressmen here, but where this is going is I remember, so each state gets to send 2 statues to the Capitol. One of those was Charles Aycock.
Right.
I remember learning about who Aycock was and thinking, why in the world would my state, North Carolina, want to send a statue? And the other person was Vance, who is also extremely racist. But I think that that's very fascinating too, if we want to get into a larger conversation of vandalism in the Capitol, how the Capitol was already kind of insulting Black people, with people like Aycock being heralded there and other Confederates. Right. Nonetheless, let's get to let's get to some more ideas of how this white supremacy is kind of being contained by the government.
Right.
I think you made some really good points in talking about how this has been stoked over years. I don't know if you saw the impeachment proceedings, but lots of people made this point that what you saw happen with the Capitol insurrection was not just a spontaneous event.
Right.
This was years of fear mongering and seeds being planted that basically bubbled up. And I want to ask you about the role of the media, because the media has been a very integral part
Right.
in stoking a lot of violence, and I'm including social media in that. How would you say the media played a role in what we saw happen in 1898 and even
Right. Oh yeah, the media played a huge role. And a lot of people know, folks that are on this call right now, the Raleigh News and Observer played a huge role in it. At the time, Josephus Daniels was the owner and editor of it, and he was, a hard-nosed white supremacist as well. He really backed that movement at the time. And then you also had other newspapers throughout North Carolina as well, particularly in Wilmington. The newspaper there, the Star News at the time, was also backing the white supremacy campaign as well. And so the newspaper were your major media outlets, during this time. And the thing is about it, a lot of people don't realize this as well. A lot of people in this country and a lot of people in North Carolina were illiterate. So they used that ignorance to their advantage by using those political cartoons and catchy taglines and headlines to really trick people to make them think a certain way. So they used the ignorance of a lot of folks during this time to their advantage. And really, it was all about pushing this agenda, and it worked.
Absolutely. I remember in the film, there was a portion where it was talked about how an erroneous article could be printed.
Right.
And it talked about just how the spread of misinformation could just snowball so quickly. An erroneous article would be printed. And even if someone decided that this was an error, by this time,
Right.
it had already
It's too late.
So, of course, this made me think about Twitter and
Right.
how you have a tweet that can be put out there.
Right.
And before you know it, it's snowballed and it's
Right.
unchecked.
Right.
And we can see how that lack of fact checking, that lack of accountability in the media, and also just this confirmation bias, this stoking of fear,
Right.
the propaganda really makes the media in a lot of ways not just complicit, but in some ways the catalyst
Oh yeah.
for a lot of this violence.
Oh yeah, they were definitely, like I said, they definitely were a major part of it. And a lot of them were on the side of that party at the time, which was the Democratic Party at the time. But let people know that it's a totally different party today than it was back then, and vice versa, as the Republican Party is today. So, but we're talking about that time, in 1890s, the Democratic Party back then was a party of white supremacy. And so a lot of those folks who were over the major media outlets, the newspaper at the time, a lot of them were affiliated with the Democratic Party of that time. So that was what they were about, to push that agenda, and that agenda led to the 1898 Wilmington Massacre.
Yeah. And again, staying on this media thing, sometimes people say, well, anybody can say things that can incite violence, but not everybody has the same platform. So when you have someone who has certain relationships with the media, now, of course, we have media conglomerates, so not everybody's just, streamlined to one person. But basically, the amount of influence you have creates the opportunity for more influence. Can you talk a little bit more about who some of those influencers were at any level that you think might have been significant? People that may have flown under the radar, just people that you may not think about when you think about all the players in a situation like this.
Oh, so many players on just in Wilmington alone and across the state as well. Like I said, we just talked about Josephus Daniels for the Raleigh News and Observer. You had Charles Aycock. You had Fernfold Simmons, who was a Democratic Party leader at the time. You had Alfred Moore Waddell, who really led the ground charge in Wilmington and made himself mayor after the coup. in Wilmington. You had William Barry McCoy, who was doing a lot of the legal stuff. He had a major role in the white government union. So it's countless people throughout Wilmington and across the state of North Carolina that was involved in this. And they all were a diverse group, meaning that some were lawyers, some were businessmen, some were politicians. Some had major jobs and positions within government. So this was a very diverse group of white supremacists that had pulled off this coup that happened in Wilmington.
Yeah, I started smiling because, oh my goodness, there's so many connections here. I remember looking at a report post the insurrection where it's almost as if people were shocked that these were people of all of these different occupations. They're doctors, they're lawyers, they're teachers, how is it that these people could just not be these people we have marginalized as these backwards people from Appalachia? And it's just like, it's fascinating that people think that a certain level of positional power would then somehow shed your white supremacy. But I think that it's good that you bring that up, because yes, you can be a white supremacist with a PhD. You can be a white supremacist with a lab coat on. You can be a white supremacist, because once you're a white supremacist, matriculating through the systemic power system is actually what it's designed for you to do. White supremacy is actually rewarded in this country. It's not deterred at all. So I don't find that to be surprising at all. But speaking of the system, I do want to, while we still have some time, get into what this looks like for education in this country. There are a lot of conversations around, I don't know if you heard of the 1776 project. That was supposed to be this thing to basically literally rewrite history. There are all these efforts to decide, what does Black history look like taught in the classroom? But I'm curious to know, I'm assuming, let me back up. I'm assuming you did a documentary on this because this is a story that is not told enough. And even though you and I are both North Carolinians, we still will never know enough about this. So I'm just curious to know, what does it look like to revamp that curriculum so that there doesn't have to continue to be another bright young Chris Everett that grows up and solves this whole mystery of what happened? What does that look like?
Oh no, it could be. I think it looks like a few things actually. I've been seeing over the past few years, I've been seeing a grassroots effort from a lot of educators and teachers who have said, you know what, I want to start teaching this in my classroom. Like, I've gotten hit up by several teachers, not only in Wilmington, but throughout the state of North Carolina, saying that, hey, your film really inspired me to want to start implementing this in my curriculum somewhat. Now, they can't do it, all the way like they want to, but a lot of them have been getting support from their principals and other administrators, but some also have been getting pushback as well, and been wanting to implement these things and start teaching this history in their classrooms, but they've been getting the pushback, from administrators, from parents as well. And so I think that, we have to do it like how we did it in the past. We have to start thinking outside the box and outside the system. We still have to push it, to get it pushed through legislature and through the system. But we can do some other things as well, like different community groups, church groups. I was doing a call the other day with a cool church group that they're doing some things like that, doing like these virtual learning sessions, with the youth at their church. So I think we have to start doing it like that. I think that's how it's going to look as we keep moving forward, just like how I did this film. We didn't get any major backing from nobody. We did it as a grassroots approach. We went right into the communities and went right into the heart, of people, and said, hey, here it is. Now do what you can with it, teach it, show it to your families, your organizations, your social circles. And I think that's how we got to do it, and continue to push it at the same time. I think it has to come on both fronts. We still have to continue to push to have this taught in our school systems, but we also have to teach it within our own circles as well.
Very, very well said. And I think another reason that it is very important to have films and discussions like this, because when you hear someone, a pundit say, this insurrection, we haven't seen anything like this since 2012. Now, of course, they're talking about the siege of the Capitol. But still, there was almost this sense of alarm, as if this is a foreign concept to the United States. The idea
Right.
of white rage, the idea of white people getting upset and destroying things. Oh my! I mean, and so it's very fascinating because immediately, what someone on our in our organization at Democracy North Carolina, a connection that they made was actually, we got Wilmington right here, and we
Right.
got this insurrection right here. So if anything, or sorry, if nothing else, I think having this documentary, having these conversations really helped to give a lot of
Right.
context to
Right.
the present, because
Right.
as you see, we were able to just run down,
Right.
like you have the red shirt militia that
Yep.
just so happens to be outside meeting whenever you have these white supremacists in the government meeting. And it's like, oh, you have the insurrection mob
Right.
that so happens to be outside at
Right.
this time. So there are really a lot of parallels that can be made. But let me ask you, what were your goals in putting out this film? What did you think would happen, or what did you hope would happen?
I just wanted to, like I said, I'm from Laurinburg, North Carolina. I was living in Laurinburg at the time. It's a small town, about 20 minutes from Lumberton, 40 minutes from Fayetteville. And I didn't know what was going to happen. I know that I wanted to tell this story. I knew that no one actually did a feature-length documentary before, and I felt like it was important. I know previous years there were like a set of bills that they were trying to pass through the government to pay a production company like 500 grand to do what I did. It never got passed through. So, seeing that, I said, you know what, I'm not going to wait around for anyone. I'm gonna go ahead and take the initiative. So I put my savings together, was able to link up with other people that wanted to really tell this story and get it out there. And also the people in front of the camera, they were all waiting for this type of opportunity to come, because they've been studying this and researching this and writing about this for years. And they had someone to really bring it to light, and really put out their knowledge and their history and knowledge about this, to the world. And so everyone was ready to do it. It just took me putting it all together. It was my first film. I was scared. I didn't know what I was doing. But luckily I was able to put people around me, that gave me the confidence and the guidance, to get through it. And, it's really exceeded my expectations. It's really done a lot for me. And also it's done a lot for the community of Wilmington, especially. Some of the people that hit me up all the time that just tell me, man, your film has really changed my life. Like whether it's business leaders who are doing things now to do more in the community in Wilmington, for other people that are really starting to create their own organizations to do things. And that's what it was really all about, to be a film and to be a film that can be used for action and a change as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, I cannot overstate how much this is so valuable, like I said, in times like this, where we're really trying to draw parallels and trying to see how we can understand. But one thing I am curious about, and I I guess this does kind of go into the conversation around compensation, reconciliation, reparations. What is going on now since the film? And I do want to go back to the reparations conversation, but this is more of my personal curiosity. What has happened in the city of Wilmington since you put this film out?
So a lot has changed. It's still Wilmington, but there's still been some progress that's going on, and that's what I've been actually doing the past couple of years with my follow-up, Wilmington on Fire Chapter 2, because there's a lot of action going on right now. It's really folks that are trying to bring Wilmington back to that spirit of 1897, of like a new fusion movement of white and Black people working together. I was just telling you before, is one guy, he's a business owner, founded a big tech company in Wilmington. He reached out to me a couple of years ago. He said, Chris, your film really changed my life, man. I've seen it twice, and I want to do more in the city of Wilmington, and especially in the African-American community. And so what he's done, he's been doing a lot of things. He's one of the leading investors of a Black-owned co-working space that's downtown Wilmington right now called Genesis Block. We've been documenting their progress. So he's been doing a lot of things like that, of really trying to help rebuild the Black business class and community in Wilmington. And so you have things like that going on throughout a lot of people just don't know about it. It's like anytime people talk about Wilmington, it's when stuff happened in the media that kind of reference it back to what happened in 1898. But I was like, you know what, Wilmington is more than that. You know, like I said, Wilmington has become a second home to me. Met some great people here. I'm still connected here. I met my wife here, you know, and so, you know, Wilmington has always had a special place in my heart. And that's why I had to really tell the story all the way around to show what people are actually doing right now to really bring this city whole and really try to get it back to what it once was.
That's amazing. You know, art can inspire things in a lot of ways, and you can have a lot of impact that you may not have even anticipated. Now, I will be honest, and this is one of the things that were difficult for me as we're transitioning into the conversation around reparations. I was looking at this through two very different lenses. I was looking at it as like, okay, we see this attack on democracy. Like I said, we've been making a lot of these comparisons to the insurrection, where you see this white rage happen in response to this feeling of, I can't even, I've been trying to find words for it, but it's just so irrational that I can't anymore. I mean, I guess feeling like they're losing control or just, they woke up today. I don't know. I don't know anymore what the catalyst is for white rage. But what I will say is it's been very difficult for me to try to figure out how to talk about the brutalization, the maiming, the massacre, the genocide that Black people had to experience as a result of this. Fortunately, with the Capitol, there was not an entire genocidal type, I guess, massacre impact that happened there. But of course, we did have 3 lives that were lost in that interaction. But I am curious to know, how did you emotionally get through dealing with these stories of people who were lynched, who were shot? How did you get through that? Because
it was tough. You know, it was tough, you know, just doing the research. I think the biggest thing for me was hearing those personal stories from direct descendants, from folks like Dr. Lewin Manley, who was the grandson of Alex Manley. You see in the background, I got, you know, this is his newspaper building that was burnt down by the white mob during the massacre of 1898. So hearing those personal stories from him, you know, him telling me how his grandparents met each other, just talking about those intimate stories of his grandfather, you know, being like the Sunday school teacher at Chestnut Presbyterian Church. And that church is still in Wilmington to this day. And then also talk about, you know, how his grandfather never got into the newspaper business ever again after this happened. And also him finding out what happened until he got like later, you know, older in life. You know, he knew about his grandfather and knew that he had a newspaper, but he didn't know about the massacre. He didn't know why they left North Carolina. He just thought like, you know, they just wanted to move and just wanted to do something else. He didn't know that the reason why was because of this event and this whole white supremacy terrorist, you know, movement that was going on during the time. Then also with Miss Faye Chaplin, who was the great granddaughter of Thomas C. Miller. And Thomas C. Miller was one of the wealthiest Black men in Wilmington prior to the massacre of 1898. Heavy in real estate. He had the only pawn shop in town as well, lent money to white and Black business folks. And so just hearing that story of not really knowing their history. So not only just the generational wealth that was lost that really got to me, but also that history and that connection as well that was lost because of this event. I think those were the 2 things, the generational wealth that was lost to the descendants and also to the African-American community as a whole in Wilmington, and also just the history that was lost to a lot of these folks. Because now I constantly get people now hitting me up, say, hey man, I watched your film and I'm starting to put some pieces together in my own family history. My great great grandfather, I got a picture. This one guy I talked to like last month, he showed me a picture of his great great grandfather who was in Wilmington that left. He didn't even know why that his family moved to New York. You know, he always knew he had family that came from down south from Wilmington. And he said his ancestor left like in like 1899 or something like that from Wilmington and left. And he said, man, seeing your film finally put the dots together. So a lot of people, and that's what the film has been doing as well, and it's been reaching folks all over this country, because a lot of our people are from the South. You know what I'm saying? Because that's where African Americans were concentrated at until we moved, from different places because of the racist attacks in the South. And so a lot of us have that lineage and that connection to Wilmington. A lot of us just don't know. So I think those were the two biggest things, the generational wealth that was lost and that history that was lost, that really got to me.
Yeah. And like I said, I mean, you never know what art is going to evoke
Right.
from whomever is consuming it. And so again, I keep saying I'm going to get to reparations, but then I'll think of something else. But let's just get to reparations. So as I'm watching this, I was actually thinking about, so I grew up in Durham, North Carolina, Black Wall Street,
Right.
very similar thing.
Right.
But I remember when I was a little girl, I used to go stand on the side of the street and, wait for the central parades to come by.
Right.
I remember they're gone now, but the projects used to be right on Fayetteville Street, like it was called Fayetteville Street Project.
Right.
And I remember my mom telling me when I was a little girl, she was like, "Oh man, all these Black doctors used to live here, and it was like Black businesses." And I was like, "Where the projects are?"
Right.
Like, "Yep, right where the projects are."
Yeah.
So I'm thinking about how throughout the country you see this replicated, where you had these sprawling Black communities that now either A, they're the projects, or B, a white person has bought the house and, lived there. Nonetheless, what does it look like, I guess, now that we're getting into a new phase of gentrification and just there's always some sort of excuse to take stuff from Black people in some way. What does it look like to, number one, give Black people back anything if things are still being taken? But how does Wilmington help frame this conversation around reparations? Is it possible?
Right.
Is it a possibility?
Well, I think it's possible. I think it's possible. A lot of people didn't think that African Americans were going to get free from slavery, and it happened. A lot of people didn't think we were going to, make it through the civil rights era and get our civil rights, but we did. And so that's what keeps me motivated and keeps me believing. But there's a great book out there by Professor Sandy Darity called From Here to Equality that everybody should check out. To me, he's the leading person on this topic. I can just give my opinion, but he's the leading person on reparations, and he's also included in the film. And you probably saw him talking about some of those things about the disparities and the wealth gap and all those things like that. But the film has really been, I think, used as a tool to help push for reparation, because it just shows that, Wilmington wasn't the only event, but it just shows an example of what did occur to African Americans all over the United States. You know what I'm saying? It just shows it in a visual form. And, recently, a few years ago, when they had the big congressional hearing on reparations, not the recent one, but a couple of years ago when they actually did it in Washington, D.C., Wilmington on Fire was mentioned a lot, on the steps of Congress and everything about watch this film. This film really shows what happened and how it led to other racial events like this throughout the South. And as a result of this. And so the film has been used for that push. I think it's definitely should be used and continues to be used for that. But again, I think reparations could be in the form of many things. I think it needs to be in the form of direct payments. I think it needs to be in the form of direct access to capital. But this is my thing. I had a discussion the other day. I was on a call, and this one guy kept going back and forth at me. I could tell that the reparations topic was making him hot. So he kept trying to throw some monkey wrenches in my way. It didn't work though. But I keep telling people all the time that reparations would actually help society as a whole. Because, for example, just like with LaRae Fleet, who talks about it in the film, talks about how Wilmington is stunted the growth of the city. Them doing this white supremacist terrorist act in Wilmington is stunted the whole growth, and Wilmington never really became the city it could have been because you had one group of people that you denied resources and opportunity to. And Wilmington back then, before the massacre, was the major city. So there's no telling what Wilmington could have been. And when you look at it in the broader strokes of things, America as a society, if you make Black people whole, it's going to make this country whole. Because one, you have a lot of African-American entrepreneurs and business folks But people don't realize that what really holds a lot of Black businesses back is access to capital. Majority of businesses, and Professor Darity has this in his book, he has all the data and everything, that majority of businesses, over 90%, are just one person, businesses, and usually the person that started it. So if you give people the opportunity and the access to have the capital that really was never passed down because of the Jim Crow laws and all these things, they're going to hire people. They're not just going to hire Black people. Yeah, they're going to hire Black people, but they're going to hire everybody because everybody works with each other. So if white people are unemployed, Hispanic, everybody, these are jobs and industries that can be created to really drive this economy for our country. So that's how I put it, and that's how it is. It's plain and simple. Reparations, yeah, it makes us whole, but it makes this country whole as well.
Absolutely. I mean, and there's so many different ways you can approach that argument for reparations.
Yeah.
You can have a capitalist argument, you can have a socialist argument, but what you can't have is a white supremacist argument for reparations. And that's
Right.
where the wall always hits. And I also like how you talked about how, you see these examples of Black people when they have things actually doing the things that people say that Black people should be doing.
Right.
And so there's this whole thing about pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, but Black people made the boots, pulled themselves up by the bootstraps.
Right. And that's the thing, and that's another narrative. When we talk about how the media and society creates these narratives, they've always created that narrative of Black people are lazy. Like when I researched for this film, I took it all the way back to the end of slavery, looking at the newspapers. They had pictures and stuff of Black people saying that we were lazy back then, coming out of slavery and during slavery.
Ironic.
So this stuff, this notion of just African Americans or don't want to pull themselves up. No, majority of Black people are conservative. Majority of Black people do what they need to do, regardless. We know racism exists, but we just say, you know what, we just got to do what we got to do. And that's really the majority of African Americans. Like myself, I didn't have any major backing to do this film. I said, you know what, I'm gonna do what I have to do. I know no one's going to give me any money, so we're going to do it. And so that's the majority of African American mindsets. We just know that this country owes us, and now it's time to pay the debt.
That's right. That's right. And I think the larger point is here, it doesn't matter what you do as a Black person. These people were people that were elected. These were doctors, these were lawyers, these were entrepreneurs, and they still got treated the same way as any person who had no bearing in society at all because they were Black. And not even because they were Black, but because they were victims of white supremacy. I like saying that better now because I've heard people say, oh, this all happened because they were Black, they were Black. No, this happened because the other they were white supremacists. So I think that we also need to start naming the actor as much as we name the victim. Now that we're looking forward into these next 4 years or this next phase of America, what can America do, in your opinion, to stop this cycle of stoking white violence and then having to have these post conversations? Because I will say this, it's a good thing that we are having this conversation, but I will say it's disappointing. That a lot of Black people watched the George Floyd uprising, and they watched how Black bodies, not buildings and statues, but Black bodies were brutalized, and Black people were, and even white protesters. I mean, people were brutalized for standing up for their rights. And so we find that to be just as offensive in the context of democracy as someone demolishing a Capitol building is offensive. But to me, again, that sets that precedent that when white people are inflicting violence on someone else, you may not get that same reaction. So to me, it still creates and perpetuates this cycle when you don't have that level of outrage and accountability whenever Black people are experiencing this type of violence. That said, how do you think we can eliminate these cycles or stop them in their tracks?
I think that we all have to just stop falling for a lot of the propaganda. What made Wilmington work is that you had the average white person and Black people coming together and say, you know what, let's put aside some of our differences. Yeah, it's not going to be perfect, because we just coming out of slavery. Yeah, we still have probably some bias towards people, but let's come together and try to do this thing. and try to be, what this Constitution said we should be, one nation. And so Wilmington was that model of people coming together. And I think that's what we got to get back to. And that's why I'm doing a part 2 to show that. And I think that's what we have to do as a people. And we have to stop, feeding into a lot of the lies and the propaganda that keeps us divided as well. But the first thing we have to do is definitely reparations. We have to have a serious discussion on it. There doesn't need to be a study. We've already studied the whole thing. You know what I'm saying? There's countless books. Professor Darrity's book you have out there. You have Black Labor, White Wealth by Dr. Claude Anderson. We have all the studies in the world. So let's go ahead and really do something real and something tangible with a reparations.
Walking around is a study. They ain't got no money in their
Exactly. If your a lot of African Americans now, my grandfather and grandmother, they were living in Jim Crow segregation. That's all the study I need. So to me, that needs to be on the table to move us forward. Also, this thing about accountability, we have to hold these people accountable moving forward. We need to do it now and still do it. And because that's how we ended up getting here in the first place. Like I said, going back to the Civil War, the United States not holding the Confederacy accountable led to Jim Crow segregation, led to the massacre of 1898, Tulsa, and all these other things. You know what I'm saying? And then even after that, them doing the massacre, they still didn't do anything to hold these people accountable, even with that. And so now we saw, last month, no one's held accountable. So, again, I think I told you the other week that, back in November, I predicted that what happened in January was possibly going to happen soon, because no one is being held accountable. They're just letting, folks say what they want to say on the media, and they saw the stuff that was being said on social media, just like in 1898, they knew people were bringing guns to Wilmington. They heard about the rumors. People were letting the president know and state officials know about what's possibly going to happen, but they let it happen, similar to what you saw on January 6th. So until we correct these things and look at history and see how it still plays in the present, we're never going to move forward as a country. But I think we have to do those things in order to do that.
Thank you so much, Chris. We're going to go to our Q&A section now. And I just want to do one thing. Quote from a friend who actually just got this posted on the Democracy North Carolina Instagram. She was interviewed. It says, any democracy that is truly equitable will repay what they took. We need reparations for all of it. That is from Marion Johnson. All right, now let's go to Q&A. What are we looking like?
Yeah, a big question that we have goes like this. Wilmington is said to be the first successful coup of government in American history. Was there any reaction or pushback from the federal government at that time? How did the federal government respond to the elected government being forcibly removed?
They really didn't respond at all. And we kind of talk about it in the film, is that, folks were writing President McKinley. President McKinley was the president during this time. Even Congressman George White, he even went to the White House to talk to McKinley as well, to send aid and troops and to do something in North Carolina and in Wilmington as well. But it didn't do, nothing happened. A lot of people told him, don't do it. And then also the president power back then was a little different than what it was now. And so the people, and that's why I said this was a very strategic thing, because the people that did the massacre, they knew this. They knew the laws. They knew how government worked. They knew the boundaries where certain people could actually cross and not cross. And so that's why they planned it this way, because they knew that, first of all, the president really, they didn't care about African Americans, period. But even if he could do something, chances are he possibly couldn't with certain things that they did. And so I know other writings also said that McKinley was really urged not to just do anything at all, because he didn't really want to cause another civil war. The Civil War really pretty much bankrupted this country and just divided it. And so to get it, just to continue to keep it forward, they just said, you know what, we're just not going to worry about it. And then that also led to, again, the whole thing of not holding people accountable. That just opened up the floodgates for white supremacy throughout the country.
Yes, and I do want to make a note. Taylor is actually asking the questions in case people were confused, like, where's his voice? So I'm not asking the questions. This is not some strange voiceover stuff happening right now. And we will actually take the next question. Taylor?
Thanks for that. This is a quick one. Did Larry Rennie Thomas write the poem that he recited at the end of the film?
Yeah, he wrote it. That's his poem. It's funny how we actually shot it, right? Like, there's a story about this. You saw the way we framed it in the film, where we're just showing his mouth with the cuts of the photos. Well, we originally were supposed to shoot it of Larry saying the poem straight on the camera, because I thought he had memorized it, but he didn't. So I was like, oh, snap, you didn't memorize the poem, so I can't just have you just looking at the paper. So I said, you know, let's just do a frame on his mouth and then just cut the images, and it worked. You know, it worked out. So yeah, that's a beautiful poem by Larry. When I first met him, he had told me he had written something. And because I was like, you know, I think we should include a poem somewhat through the film. You know, originally it was supposed to be in the beginning of the film, but it worked and played out better as having it at the end to kind of close out the film. Kind of just puts everything in perspective. It's a lovely poem, and I'm glad that, you know, he had it and he nailed it.
Definitely. We have a lot of questions about your independent researcher, Kent Chatfield. I think folks were interested in the fact that he had maybe like a funky t-shirt on that you might be able to explain, and the fact that he was the one white researcher you had in the film.
Well, you know,
talk more about that.
yeah, Kent, you know, he calls himself, he calls himself, a fusionist person as well. I don't have no comments on someone's fashion. I'm not a stylist. They wear what they want to, but Kent was an amazing researcher, independent researcher. He's been, researching this topic for years, and he brought a lot to the table. And we were very thankful to have his knowledge and him sharing, a lot of those personal stories as well. Him hearing things and what led to his doing this research, and that kind of goes with everybody. Him, Larry, Professor Darity, Lorraine Umfleet, who actually wrote the state report for North Carolina about the 1898 massacre. Everyone brought their A game and all their great research and knowledge to the project, and also we couldn't even fit all of it in the hour and a half. So what I planned on doing is I might actually release like a 4-hour cut later this year, because it was a lot that we couldn't compact in like an hour and a half that I really wish I could have got in there. And so I said, you know what, it's been bothering me for the past couple of years. I said, you know what, let me put out this 3.5 hour, 4-hour version later this year, so people can still see that there's still, a lot more to the research and to the story as well.
And, you mentioned that Kent is a fusionist. Some people were asking if you could say more about fusion government, their understanding that it's the Republican and the populists at that time.
Yeah.
Some folks were wondering, did any of those white fusionists try to resist or help, or was it all violence and propaganda and it was?
Well, that fusionist movement at that time, was really, white populists and Black Republicans kind of coming together and really saying, you know what, let's try to take over political power in North Carolina and really do our thing. And also African Americans finally getting a seat at the table, and so they could actually get some tangibles and some resources as well, because they all figured out that, we all want the same things. I'm saying? We want our kids to have good schools. We want to be able to have the opportunity to start businesses. We want to have good employment. We want to, build schools, build churches. We all want the same things and be safe in this society. So they kind of merged together in this thing called fusion. And it was a cool thing of really what the New South could have been, with this whole movement, after, this time and after the end of Reconstruction. But a lot of white fusionists were also targeted during the massacre of 1898 as well. And a lot of them had to leave Wilmington. A lot of them were stripped of their power and roles as well. The effect is still different, because you as a white person, yeah, you might have got affected by this massacre, but at the end of the day, your skin is still white. You can easily integrate into any society in this country. You know what I'm saying? African Americans couldn't do that. You know what I'm saying? You're tagged Black all the way through. Didn't matter whether you was a politician, you was a business person or not, you still were considered Negro at the time. And so just that integration into society just was a lot, it was just a lot stricter on the African American side than from the white side, but they actually did experience some pushback as well during the massacre of 1898. But again, they were able to actually reintegrate into society. All they had to do was just, either not vote no more or just change their possible political affiliation, and they were all right. It didn't matter what political affiliation aside or what type of business or whatever social standing you had as an African American person, you were still Black. And so the law of the land was African Americans have no rights, period.
All right. Do we have time for any more questions? Or if not, I had a question. It was actually a question that someone else asked that I was curious about. So this is, to be fair, coming from the Q&A still. Someone asked, so is there something more systemic though that's now being integrated in the Wilmington history curriculum?
Well, no. The thing is that they're still fighting for that. You know, we saw it recently, just even on the state level. You know, even in Wilmington, they're still fighting. That's the hardest battle, is this educational system. I haven't seen anything like it. You know, they're still trying to fight it, especially through K through 12 in Wilmington. But UNC Wilmington on the college level is a little bit different. They've been doing a lot with the 1898 massacre. They've been doing a lot with Wilmington on Fire. They're actually working on, you know how like with colleges and universities, you have like an entry film that you have to watch. Like if you're a freshman, they kind of recommend. So what they're doing, they're working on now, UNCW is making Wilmington on Fire, that type of film. You know, so UNCW has been doing a lot in regards to teaching about this history and incorporating it throughout their school and their university. On the public school side, it's a little different. Like I said, you have teachers out there that have taken the initiative and have found different cool and creative ways. They've even reached out to me. We've done some things with quite a few teachers and schools in Wilmington. Again, it's going to take a while to really get, you know, people on one accord and get a school board that's really going to push for it. But until then, you know, I think people just have to think outside the box. I know at Full Frame, we have an excellent program called Teach the Teachers that kind of shows teachers and people that, you know, parents that teach, you know, their kids at home, you know, how to use documentaries like Wilmington on Fire into their curriculum and make it in a fun and interesting way where, you know, they can really digest and learn the information. You know what I'm saying? So we got a class coming up March 17th. If any educator or person that wants to learn how to use documentaries like Wilmington on Fire, you know, to educate and teach their kids. So just go to fullframefest.org and they can sign up.
All right, Chris. Well, I think that's going to do it for our Q&A and everything else for tonight. I really want to give you a huge round of applause, I guess the best that I can do from my seat here, and really just show a lot of appreciation for you as you enter a lineage of Black storytellers that have really helped to keep our history alive while simultaneously holding white people accountable. We can't hold anybody accountable by ignoring the facts. And to everybody who has asked all these questions about where you can see the film and how you can learn more, the great thing is if you registered, we do have your email address and we're gonna send you all the information that you need, from how to watch the film to how to actually get this recording and re-access it. And you will have everything you need to make sure that you're up to date on when Wilmington on Fire 2 comes out. We're really looking forward to that. I know you're going to go deep into some of these questions that people have asked in that. And again, I just want to thank you. And to everybody who's watching out there tonight, especially white people, this question came at me all of 2020. As a white person, what can I do? As a white person, how can I help? As a white person, you know, if you want to reach out to me and talk to me as a white person, as a white person, as a white person, as a white person, it happens all the time. There's a scene in the Malcolm X movie where this white woman walks up to him and she's like, what can I do to help? It happens all the time. Let me help you, help me, help us. Accountability is the word of the evening. If you took nothing else from tonight, when you do not hold white people accountable for doing wrong, you empower them to do it again. That's all I got. Have a good night, everybody.
All right.
All right. See you later.